So really big keyword reveals for every single Warhammer 40k army today. Looks like Invicta Warsuits and Black Templar Crusaders will scout towards the enemy. All the Drukhari transports can deep strike. And we've got some clues as to what's battle line and infiltrators. Let's talk through every army in 40k and the new information. Hello and welcome back to Warspets Tactics, where today we have some more info on every army in Warhammer 40k, and from a rather interesting source, the Games Workshop Webstore. Basically, we've got some very good clues as to what units in each army are going to be battle line, deep strike, infiltrators and scouts. Kind of interesting to understand how a few units in each faction will function in 10th edition. In Warhammer 40k 10th edition, one of the major changes was to army construction. The old battlefield roles that have existed for a really long time are gone, things like fast attack, heavy support, elites and HQs. None of these really exist anymore in 10th edition, everything's just either a battle line unit, a regular unit, and maybe an epic hero, at least in terms of army construction. Previously, the Games Workshop web store was organised by these battlefield role categories though. I feel like they need as many ways to classify their many flavours of Warhammer miniature, compared with say just having one section for Space Marines and literally giving you 90 different units with no organising whatsoever. It seems to update the web store for 10th edition, Games Workshop have rejigged things a bit. The keywords on the side of each army have been shuffled around, now you can filter things by battle line, scouts, infiltrators, characters, fly, and a bunch of other things. And while a few of these are kind of obvious, things like vehicle keywords, or what can fly and what doesn't, perhaps some of the most interesting things are the ones that are basically direct battlefield rules that will apply to units, particularly battle line units, which mean that you can take up to 6 of them rather than up to 3, infiltrators, which means that you can deploy them in the midfield. They're very useful for taking points early and screening out the enemy. Scouts are units with pre-game moves in 10th edition. They can either move up into the midfield, kind of similar to infiltrators, or I guess they could just potentially be a bit more cagey and pull back if the opponent's going to get the jump on them. And deep strike are units that come in from teleport style reserves. A lot of those are kind of obvious, but plenty of things have been shifted, say, from one category to another. I think it's really quite a cool way of assessing how a faction will function. The list might not be 100% complete, and there likely will be a few errors by the way that they've classified them, or things that maybe might not be quite so obvious, like say Pathfinders gaining infiltrators via an upgrade. That appears to mean that they won't appear in the infiltrators section. I have a feeling that maybe some variant builds for units might not be fully classified as well, perhaps. Things like Death Company with jump packs not having deep strike in this keyword system, presumably because they're a variant kit, so I guess that this is more useful as a rule in for the keywords as opposed to a rule out. A whole load of really interesting things though, and some things that might turn up in surprising categories. I thought we'd talk through each army in turn, and any interesting shifts. First up, we've got Space Marines, certainly the army with the most units to choose from. In the battle line section is only listed Intercessors, Heavy Intercessors, and Assault Intercessors. Perhaps most weirdly, Tactical Marines aren't listed here. I guess we don't know for 100% confirmed that they're not battle line yet, but it seems like there's at least a reasonable chance that they aren't. If so, that would be very, very weird. They are basically firstborn troops, and I don't know why Games Workshop wouldn't classify them as such. I guess we'll know for definite when the index drops. It also looks like things like Infiltrators and Incursors aren't listed in this section. Perhaps they're a bit more understandable, being in a bit of a different battlefield role from frontline troops. I guess it's always possible that certain detachments might mess around with the battle line keywords, maybe if there was an entire Phobos detachment in the Space Marine Codex perhaps. Otherwise, for deep strikers, we've got the Drop Pod, Land Speeders and Storm Speeders, Vanguard Veterans, Inceptors and Assault Squads. I guess Suppressors won't be listed there because they're part of the Combat Patrol box. And the Terminator Assault Squad. I guess Relic Terminators are listed under Horus Heresy, and the new version of the big Terminators hasn't come out yet. Land Speeders and Storm Speeders getting deep strike is interesting. I guess that'll give them another role for getting towards the enemy, though generally they often tend to be units that can happily start on the board, given that they're very fast. Otherwise no enormous surprises there, I'd say. Next up, for Infiltrators, it's fairly similar to how it was before. The Phobos Captain and Librarian, the Eliminator Squad, and the Infiltrators. Interestingly, not the Incursors though, as they seem to have moved to Scouts. Looks like if you want for deployment Primaris Marines, you're looking at either Infiltrators or Eliminators now, and Incursors have shifted in role a bit. Not listed in either category are the actual Space Marine Scouts as well, which is kind of surprising. I do kind of wonder if that might foreshadow a new miniature release for those guys. They're definitely more likely out of the Space Marine range, given that we've seen the new Black Templar updated versions. I kind of wonder if that might be the reason that they're missing from any categories there. Finally, for the actual Scout keywords, there's the Scout Bikers, Reavers and the Reaver Lieutenants. Good to give them a little bit more of a niche, I suppose. Those guys aren't listed in Deep Strike, though I suppose if you give them grab shoots via an upgrade, then they might still well be able to. The Invicta Tactical Warsuit has taken a shift as well. Previously that would have been Infiltrators, now it looks like it's Scouts. So I guess it gets a pre-game move towards the enemy rather than setting up right on the enemy's front line. Overall, a few interesting shifts there. Perhaps Tactical Marines not being listed under battle line will be the biggest surprise, if that is indeed accurate, and I guess we'll find out when their index drops. Otherwise, for the Divergent Chapters, things like Black Templars, Blood Angels, Dark Angels, Death Watch and Space Wolves, here we have a few previews as well. A lot of their unique stuff tends to be more frontline units or characters and things, but they do have a few listed in some of these categories. For battle line units, no real surprise that the Crusader Squads, the Blood Claws and the Grey Hunters are all here. They're all basically troops out of their factions, and same with the Death Watch veterans. For Deep Strikers, the Blood Angels jump pack characters are here, things like Astrath, the Martyrs, the Sanguinor and Dante, plus the Sanguinary Guard as well. As I mentioned earlier, Death Guard aren't listed here. I do wonder whether that's just because they've got alternate builds with either jump packs or no jump packs, and that might be the cause of them not being listed on the Webstore here. For the Space Wolves, it's the Terminators and all Terminator characters. No huge surprises. Logan's listed here himself, but he does have Terminator armor if you chose to build him not on Storm Rider. For the Dark Angels, we've got Deathwing Terminators and Deathwing Knights, plus Belial. Weirdly, the Interrogator Chaplain was also listed here. Maybe that might imply he might still have a jump pack option on his datasheet perhaps. And also Deathwatch Kill Team Cassius is also here as well. Maybe they'll be able to teleport into the battle just innately. For Infiltrators, there aren't any unique things to these armies. Often having some Infiltrators borrowed from Core Codex Space Marines is pretty reasonable for most of these though. And under the Scout section, again we've got the Primaris Crusader squad here, so an interesting pre-game move for the Black Templars I suppose. And also we've got the Hounds of Morkai for the Space Wolves, maybe not too surprising as basically a Reaver variant, and we have already seen their datasheet with a whole bunch of devastating wounds. Maybe the Crusader squad getting Scouts is one of the more interesting things here. Will be pretty good fun to flood the board with a tide of power armor, zealously crusading towards the enemy lines. Next up we've got the Imperial Guard. On the battle line we've got the three variants of infantry units, Cadian Shock Troops, Kaschan Jungle Fighters, and Death Corps of Krieg. At least on the Webstore, the Tempestus Scions are not listed under battle line at the moment. Might not be the best news for Scion armies, at least on the drop. You might be restricted to just 3 squads of these, which would be a bit disruptive if you happen to play Tempestus Scions as your primary army. I guess it's not impossible that they might have some sort of exception. Games Workshop has historically written rules in the past that allow you to play a bit more of a Scion-focused army, such as that allied detachment that they had back in Arcs of Omen. Hopefully Guard players don't have to wait to the Codex to field a full Scion detachment once more. I think that would be a bit rubbish. The Scions are of course in the Deep Strikers section. There's no Guardsman Marbo here it would seem. It looks like he's been moved to Infiltrators, so I suppose the one-man army will be setting up in the midfield now. Otherwise in the midfield we've still got Rattlings here as well, really quite nice to sit on far-flung objectives with their move shoot move, and Gaunt Ghosts still seem to be here as well. It looks like the Scout Sentinel's been moved from Infiltrators to Scouts, still pretty handy but maybe not quite as much so as setting up in the midfield. And it actually looks like Games Workshop are given the Kaschan Jungle Fighters a bit more of a point to their existence, as it looks like they, Sergeant Harker and Ironhand Strachan all get Scouts as well, so it looks like they're going to be an interesting infantry choice to push up towards the midfield, potentially being the first wave of your army, and hopefully they might actually have some sort of meaningful buff to their combat damage again now. The datasheet in 9th edition was a bit weak. Finally, and perhaps a small surprise, is that the Cadian Kazakin get to have Scouts as well. Kind of feels like a bit of a throwback to the whole Doctrines thing. Feels kind of like forward sentries. I could certainly imagine them conferring that to a Chimera and then moving that up the board a bit to get the jump on the enemy. Maybe it could be kind of interesting for Alpha Strikes with that, plus the new transport rules. For the Adeptus Mechanicus, maybe no enormous surprises here. On the battle line, we've got Skitarii Rangers and Vanguard. It would appear that the Cataphren Servitors, despite being troops, do not appear to be battle line anymore. Maybe not amazing if you have a ridiculous amount of breaches or something. In general, I tended to see them fielded in smaller units on the whole though. Otherwise, for Deep Strikers, it's the Tyraxius Sterilizers and Skystalkers only, just innately on the datasheet apparently. I guess Flyers will have the option of going into Strategic Reserve as per normal. For the Infiltrators, it's unsurprisingly the Sicarian Infiltrators there. I'm sure a unit or two of those will still be very good for securing the midfield. And for units with the Scout special rule, it's the Skitarii Rangers and the Cerberus Raiders. I kind of wonder whether the Rangers will still keep their very mini Scout move, or whether Games Workshop might be a bit more generous to them and actually give them a full 6-inch move this time round, rather than just a little bit lockstep pre-game shuffling. For the Adeptus Custodes, we've got the Custodian Guard and the Prosecutors on the battle line. It looks like the Forge World choices haven't reshuffled their web store yet, so we can't confirm whether the Militarum Custodes might also get battle line or not, but otherwise these ones are as expected, they are the troops. For Deep Strikers, we've got all Custodian infantry, but no dreadnoughts or anything listed. For Infiltrators, none are listed here, but they didn't really have any before either. And perhaps the Scout section is the weirdest out of them. Valerian and Alea are listed there, so I'd guess one of those will confer Scouts to a unit that they join, perhaps. And interestingly enough, the Witch Seekers aren't listed here, at least on the web store. Maybe a little bit on the unexpected side there. They have the Scout rule with their flamethrowers and were quite fun riding forward in a Rhino. Looks like there's at least a reasonable chance that they might have lost it, but I still think that these web store tags could have been applied a little bit carelessly potentially. I'd say they're more useful for ruling things in rather than ruling things out. For the Grey Knights, maybe it's kind of similar to the Custodes. On the battle line now they only have the Strike Squad though. The Terminator Squad for Grey Knights isn't listed here at all. I feel like maybe it was kind of rare that Grey Knights armies would take more than 3 units of Terminators though. You can get a whole load of points of Terminator goodness if you max them out. For Deep Strikers, it's basically all Grey Knight infantry plus the Nemesis Dread Knight variants. Teleporting very much seems to be their thing in 10th edition, with both their army and their detachment rule loosely basing around it. And then as with currently, there's no Infiltrators or Scouts listed whatsoever. It's not like they have the most options for those sort of roles though in their codex. I guess they'll just have to be satisfied with excessive Deep Strike, with all their blinking around the board. For the very faithful sisters, we have the Adepta Sororitas. Their battle line is just literally the Battle Sister squad now, not novitiates apparently. Again, due to army construction though, you'd rarely be fielding all that many novitiates, so it probably isn't the biggest loss in the world. On the Deep Strike front, we've got Seraphim and Zephyrim jumping down from the skies as they do at the moment. Celestine can also Deep Strike with her Gemini, and Ethrelstone and Kaiganil can as well. Seems that Infiltrators none are listed whatsoever. Those novitiate sisters don't seem to be getting Infiltrators or Scouts here at least. And for the Scouts rule, again like the Sisters of Silence, the Dominions aren't listed here, so again the Special Weapon Sisters might well have lost that rule. Interestingly listed in the Scout section is the Palatine, so maybe that's going to be one of the rules that she confers on the unit that she adds to now, rather than just direct reroll 1's damage buffs. Hopefully they manage to give her a bit more of a battlefield role and something a bit more interesting. I feel like she's maybe struggling to stand out with other support characters at the moment. The Imperial Knights were never really going to have all that many of these, and we basically already knew that the Warglaves would already get battle line, and the Helverins do as well. I guess that these datasheets probably won't have the option to squadron up anymore. You can currently take 3 of them and break them into 3 different units. Getting battle line I suppose would allow you to take 6 of either variant, and then deploy them all separately, which will be a bit more flexible admittedly. There's none of the other 3 characters, at least innately, and it's kind of interesting to see the Sacristan Forge Shrine listed in the fortification section. That used to be a fortification choice that they could take, then they removed it for 9th edition. I suppose if it's still here after a review, then maybe they might get it back. Not really a change I was expecting to be honest, but could be kind of fun if so. Finally for the Imperium, we've also got the Agents of the Imperium. None of their units are listed as battle line. It does seem that from the preview that we had of the Retinue Squad, the one that we had for the Voidsmen at Arms, they didn't have battle line. Looks like the retinue units don't get it, but they do have the retinue keywords to allow you to take either 1, 2 or 3 of them, depending on army size. Otherwise in the keyword section we've got the Collectors and Calidus listed under Deep Strike. Previously all the Assassins could do this, but it looked like the Vindicare lost it when we saw his datasheet. The Vindicare instead gets the Infiltrators keyword, so he can set up on a high ruin in the midboard maybe, that could be kind of fun. And he's also joined there by the Calidus as well. I guess she's going to have multiple different options for infiltrating into the midst of enemy lines. Finally, the only unit listed in the Scout section is the Eversaur Assassin. Looks like he's just going to be deploying normally with your forces, but then full on sprinting towards the enemy army. I do quite like the image of him just charging solo towards the enemy army before any of the rest of the forces have got a chance to keep up with him. I'm sure he could probably solo a whole bunch of them. Chaos next, and for standard Chaos Space Marines, we only have Chaos Space Marines and their legionary equivalents from the kill team listed here, along with the Chaos Cultists. Perhaps notable absentees from this section are Traitor Guardsmen, Accursed Cultists, and Noise Marines, which you could field as troops if you were playing Emperor's Children. I guess all of these might well be being run in smaller numbers. I feel like there's at least the possibility that Noise Marines might have a way to gain battle line, maybe if you have Lucius Eternal as the leader of your army perhaps. Hopefully they managed to think ahead for that one. I think it would be a shame for Emperor's Children players otherwise. For Deep Strikers, the jump pack units and the Terminators all get it, as you'd guess. That includes the special characters like Abaddon the Despoiler or Harken World Claimer. Obliterators seem to get it as well, and also Vashtor the Archfane and the Demon Prince can deep strike too. Sadly, it still seems that there's nothing listed for Infiltrators or Scouts within the Chaos Space Marine Codex. Can't help but think it might have been nice to give that to something like the Accursed Cultists maybe. I feel like Scouts could perhaps have fit them okay. Having units in the mid-board really does seem like a bit of a weakness for the Chaos Space Marine roster, definitely one downside to the army overall. For the deity aligned legions, first up we have the Death Guard. Their battle line purely seems to be made up of Plague Marines now. It doesn't seem that either Poxwalkers or Chaos Cultists are listed here, and indeed while they're listed under Thousand Sons, the Cultists aren't listed under Death Guard whatsoever. Hopefully Games Workshop still allows more generic stuff to be taken in Death Guard. The World Eaters did have a bit of a cull of lots of other options from the standard Chaos Space Marine army, including things like generic Lords and Chaos Space Marine Cultists not actually making it into the Codex. I feel like it's a bit of a shame for Poxwalkers, which are often a model that quite a lot of Death Guard players have lots of. Unless there's any other special rules or they do wind up being battle line, I guess that might mean that you've got a cap of 60 on how many you can field now. For Deep Strikers, all the Terminator units are there, including characters, along with the Demon Prince. Mortarion himself from the datasheet that we saw appears not to be able to Deep Strike, although Angron can. For the Infiltrators, there aren't any listed for Death Guard, and nor are any for Scouts either. I might have guessed that either perhaps the Bloat Drones or the Blight Haulers might have got Scouts, but it seems that like the standard Chaos Space Marines, Death Guard just aren't really going to have any mid-board presence from deployments, including a fair few of their units being kind of slow. Next up we've got the Thousand Sons. In the battle line there's Rubik Marines, Zangors and Cultists all listed. Looks like they're kind of spoiled for choice for battle line units there, and if it does for some reason make sense to field hordes of Zangors, then you can still do that as an army build should you want to. For Deep Strikers, we've got Magnus the Red, the Scarab Occult Terminator, plus the Terminator Sorcerer, plus the Thousand Sons Demon Prince. I'm a little bit unsure as to why Magnus might get Deep Strike but Mortarion might not, if this is accurate. It's not like they both don't have wings. Otherwise, as with the Death Guard and the standard Chaos Marines, Infiltrators and Scouts still seem to be a weakness of the army. Finally, for the Deity Legions, we've got the World Eaters. On the battle line, we've got the Khorne Berserkers and the Jackals. No enormous surprises there, perhaps. For Deep Strikers, Exalted 8-bound still do it apparently. Angron does as he rips his way back into reality, and Chaos Terminators have it as well. No listed Infiltrators, and they didn't have any before, but under the Scouts units, that's now listed as 8-bound and Lord Invocatus. Looks like your standard units of 8-bound might not necessarily need to get a Lord Invocatus buff to be zooming them forward across the table. They should still be absolutely hilariously dangerous melee threats that rush towards the enemy turn 1. I guess in the 10th edition codex that might relieve a bit of the tension between Angron and Lord Invocatus. Currently the inclusion of Angron makes Lord Invocatus way worse as he can't use his scouting warlord trait, but if 8-bound get that anyway, it might be a bit less necessary. For the Chaos Demons, it looks like this section is just a bit incomplete on the Webstore. Seems like most of the other armies have had their units classified, but the Chaos Demons hasn't yet at time of recording. A few things are listed in the right place, but quite a lot's listed wrong. They aren't listed with any battle line units, but we have seen both Plague Bearers and Horrors do indeed have that keyword, and from extension of that, the Bloodletters and the Demonettes would have it too. I'd be surprised if things like Nurglings get it, though I guess there might be the possibility that Blue Horrors might be able to be fielded battle line. We'll have to wait and see for that one. For Deep Strikers, there's only 3 units listed in the Chaos Demons section there, which is definitely wrong, as basically everything in the Codex has it, and I guess that means that we can't draw anything from nothing being listed in terms of Infiltrators or Scouts. So far I don't think that we've seen any of those on the teased datasheets yet, when we saw a good chunk of the Codex. Maybe Nurglings are one of the more interesting cases there, as they could infiltrate before. It'd be really quite interesting if that's still an option, as they'd still give that option to other allied Chaos Space Marines and stuff. We did see the Ripper Swarms get to be at Objective Control 0 though, so there might be a reasonable chance that even if they can start in the mid-board, they might not actually be able to take points now. Finally for the Chaos, we've got the Chaos Knights, kind of similar to the Imperial Knights here, in that we've just got battle line for all the War Dogs. Again, I'd probably guess that they won't be squadrons, it just seems a bit less necessary if you can field 6 units of them. And then there's basically nothing else from the other alternative deployment categories. Eldar next, and I noticed that Harlequins were listed as a keyword within Aeldari now. Technically I guess that's not perhaps too different from how they were in the Eldar Codex from 9th edition, but from all the hints that we've seen so far it looks like Harlequins might not get a launch detachment or anything like that, which might be kind of sad for Harlequins players losing a bunch of rule support. I guess they can still use that Aeldari battle host and soup in with regular Crash Balls units a lot easier than before, and you could still run an entire Harlequin army should you wish to. At least the battle host rules do look very very good for the Eldar, with those Strands of Fate and the big rerolls. In any case, on the battle line for the Aeldari we've got Guardian Defenders and Storm Guardians. Corsairs are also listed here as well. Those ones are perhaps fairly unsurprising, but it does appear that Rangers, as was previewed on their datasheet, haven't got battle line at all. Only 3 units of those now, I suppose. Dire Avengers don't appear to be moving back to the troops anytime soon, and also Harlequin troops aren't listed under battle line either. Again, similar to Militarum Tempestus Scions, I really hope that Games Workshop have thought of a way to allow you to field a Harlequin-focused army. If you're limited to just 3 troop units, then it's just not really going to be possible. Lots of troops seem to build around heavy use of troops in Starweavers. I guess with those I'd kind of cross my fingers for a rule on the Aeldari army rules, something that allows you to get more troops if you field nothing but Harlequins perhaps. Otherwise, for deep strikers, we've got Swooping Hawks and the Winged Autarch, Warp Spiders and their Warp Jump shenanigans, plus the Vulcan Grav Tank. Looks like that's still going to be happily cloud striking down from the heavens. For Infiltrators, the Aeldari have 2 options that we've already seen the datasheets for, the Rangers and the Striking Scorpions, and it looks like that any of the Phoenix Lords that back up their aspects will also get the same rules. Karandras also has Infiltrators, and I'd guess Bararoth will probably have Deep Strike. They're just not listed on the Webstore because Games Workshop currently has them on range rotation. Finally for Scouts, we've got the War Walkers striding forward with their big heavy weapons. The Eldar Shroud Runner jet bikes still have them, and also the Corsairs still pick that up as well, so they'd be able to move a bit towards the enemy and secure the midfield too. For the Drukhari, they get battle line on their Kabalites, Witches and Racks. Will be surprising if any of those were dropped really, and also the Corsairs as well. Looks like the Drukhari transports pick up some Screaming Jets, with Raiders, Ravagers and Venoms all able to deep strike. I feel like that could be kind of interesting in some matchups. Maybe have a big Raider that's chock full of Kabalite warriors with a bunch of splinter weapons and lances, descend it from the heavens, and then open up on enemy units nearby. Scourges also get deep strike as well. For Infiltrators, none are listed on the Webstore, though I'd bear in mind that Mandrakes are currently not listed on the Webstore due to being on range rotation. Hopefully they'll still be in the Drukhari army list, and I feel like there's a reasonable chance that they might pick up Infiltrators, or at least retain Deep Strike. It would feel kind of appropriate for them. Finally, the Corsairs also have the Scouts, the same as the Aeldari, so I guess they are an option for getting into the midfield before the game begins. For the Tyranids, they've got a whole bunch of new units coming, most of which won't be listed on the Webstore yet, but there are quite a lot of interesting hints here already. Weirdly enough, the Tyranid Webstore section doesn't have a battle line section, which I must admit is kind of odd. I'd be very surprised if they didn't have the battle line keyword on their units for some reason, but to be fair to them, it does actually tally with the Termagants datasheet that they've released. For whatever reason, the ones in the Leviathan downloads don't have battle line, though they do have endless multitudes. I guess we also know that their warrior datasheets are going to be divided into ones with ranged weapons and ones with melee weapons, so I guess between those 2 datasheets you could still have 6 units of them. Plus I suppose if you mix between the swarm units a bit, you could still have 60 Termagants and 60 Hormagaunts, so you could still field a pretty respectable swarm on the table. Seems like it might be an oversight. Will be interesting to see if those units do actually wind up with battle line, or if Tyranids are going to weirdly lack the keyword for some reason. Otherwise, from Deep Strike we've got Raveners, Trigons and Morlocks, all burrowing up from below the earth. The Gargoyles and the Winged Hive Tyrants swoop down from above. Kind of nice to see that Gargoyles have regained Deep Strike again. They lost it in the Tyranid decks for some reason while they were troops. The Parasite of Mortrex can Deep Strike, and the Winged Prime can from the Leviathan downloads, and also the Tyrannocyte's Tyranid drop pod. For Infiltrators, the Lictor has that apparently. I do wonder if we're going to be getting a new model for him at some stage. Von Ryan's Leapers, like the Prime, aren't in the Webstore, but we've seen that on their datasheet. And then both the Genestealers and the Broodlord have the Scouts keyword, so they can zoom up into the midfield. Again, maybe a small shift for them. The Genestealers previously had Infiltrators in the Codex before. Next up, we've got their cultist allies in the Genestealer Cults. On the battle line for these guys, unsurprisingly, there's the Neophyte Hybrids and the Acolyte Hybrids. Perhaps battle line is more relevant for the Genestealer Cults than any other army, as it basically guarantees that they have the chance to respawn and put their Cult Ambush token on the board, resurrecting entire units from the dead if the opponent can't reach them. The Deep Strike keyword applies to basically all infantry, but not the vehicles and not the jackals. That was more or less what I would have guessed, to be honest. Hard to imagine a Goliath truck rising up from below quite as much as a unit of Genestealers. For Infiltrators, the Reductus Saboteur gets that, so they can get close and explode some things in the midboard if needed. The Brood Coven has that rule listed, not sure in what way that's going to happen. Maybe the Primarch or the Patriarch will be able to give that to a unit that they lead, and the Sanctus also has this one as well, either with his stabby knife or his sniper rifle. Finally, the Jackals retain Scouts, so they can also take the midfield, and the Attilan Ridge Runner also has this. Interestingly, it looks like the Hybrid Metamorphs have also picked up Scouts as well, so I guess they could be an interesting acolyte alternative to throw into the midboard now with all of their claw attacks. That's really quite a lot of options for scouting units, to be honest. Should be helpful for screening out the opponent and keeping them away from your cult ambush tokens once you try and respawn units. For the Tower Empire, on the battle line we have the Fire Warriors, just the Strike team and the Breacher team. Recruit are not listed here anymore, so their Carnivore squads might be a little bit more limited in how many you can field. If the datasheet is still separate to the Recruit Farstalkers, I suppose you could still have plenty of Recruit though, via the use of both datasheets. For Deep Strike, that's still for the Crisis Suits and the Crisis Commander. Tactical drones seem to have this as well, and I think that one of the other previews did confirm that they're still a unit. Drones are mainly war gear for a bunch of other tower forces though. Vespid Stingwings can still drop down from the sky, and it seems that the Piranha has also picked up Deep Strike too. Maybe kind of similar to things like Space Marine Land Speeders, though given its profile, I'd be surprised if it's all that useful. Generally they're quite nice for starting on the board with great movement, if you want to go that way. For Infiltrators, Tau have a lot of options. All the stealth units still have this rule, Shadow Sun, Stealth Suits, and the Ghost Kill. I think they might have mentioned that Shadow Sun has Lone Operative as well. Sniper drones fitting in with the stealth things also get Infiltrators as well, and it also looks like it's going to be an option for Pathfinders. Darkstrider apparently seems to have it innately, and though Pathfinders aren't listed in the Infiltrators section, we have already seen their datasheet, and they have a drone that allows them to do so. Finally, for the Scout Special rule, both Darkstrider and the Pathfinders have that as well, interestingly making them both Scouts and Infiltrators, so could get really far forward. Perhaps with being fairly fragile though, they often might not want to. As with now as well, all the Recruit units also have Scout, pretty handy for pushing them up into the midboard, being expendable chaff, even if they aren't all that tough against quite a few attacks. Orks are next, and for battle line units for them, we've just got the Orc Boys and the Beast Snagger Boys. Seems that Gretchen might not be battle line now. I feel like that is kind of relevant, as a fair few Orcs lists currently tend to like to field quite a lot of small units of them for running around grabbing points and screening and things. Might not be the best news in the world if you did want to field a whole load of these diminutive little guys. We've not seen their max unit size yet, but it seems that a few units in 10th edition are going from 30 down to 20 as the maximum size of a squad. If so, that might just be 60 Gretchen at maximum. Otherwise, for Deep Strike, we've got Deathcopters and Storm Boys, similar to now. For Infiltrators, we've got the Commandos, again unsurprising there. Currently, Snickrot's not yet listed on their web store, so I guess he'll be along later and will probably also get the keyword and join the Commandos. And then for Scouts for Orcs, there's none listed at all. Looks like it's going to be the job of the sneaky Orcs to secure the midboard. Maybe no amazing surprises there, besides perhaps the Gretchen not being battle line. For the Necrons, for battle line units, we've got both Warriors and Immortals, just the standard troops copy-pasted over there. Necrons seem to have quite a lot of options for Deep Strike though. Hex marks and death marks, warping in from hyperspace to take down their targets. The Monolith and the Obelisk can get it, presumably from Death Descending perhaps. Ophidian Destroyers can still pop up and cause havoc, and Triarch Praetorians can, as their sort of jump pack Necrons. Perhaps most relevantly, the flayed ones appear to have been changed from Deep Strikers to Infiltrators. They were somewhat popular as little interesting disruptive Deep Strikers, but I feel like moving them to Infiltrators might be good news for the faction overall. Will be quite nice to have them start on mid-board objectives and give your opponent some annoying Necron units to deal with, or potentially have the chance for getting a first turn charge with those razor-sharp claws. The other really interesting change on this section is that Tomb Blades are listed as Scouts now. That implies they're going to get a pre-game move kind of similar to the Aeldari Shroud Runners. I feel like that's a really big deal for them, seeing as they're fast jet bikes. Could easily mean that they could reach units that your opponent might not expect them to be able to first turn, either getting line of sight on something very fragile and the enemy thinks that it's safe, or even doing a nuisance charge to tie up enemy infantry in the backline who'd really rather be firing their guns. Overall, I feel like that's pretty interesting for them, could bode well for at least one unit of them being a good idea just for utility. Finally, we've got the 40k Space Dwarves with the Leagues of Votann. It's not like they have a entirely massive unit roster yet, so I'm not surprised to see some empty categories here. The battle line are Hearthkin Warriors. There's no Deep Strike listed, though it might be that things like the Teleport Crest might well give you Deep Strike, but as a war gear option wouldn't count for this. For Infiltrators, there's none listed, but they have none now. And then for Scouts, it still looks like the Hernkin Pioneers can still do that, and seem like they'll still be very relevant as a result, but also it looks like Sagittars have picked that up too. I think that's potentially very interesting if they can scout into the midboard with a unit of scary Chthonian Berserks inside. Very intimidating for getting scary melee dwarves into battle. So anyway, there we have it, a bit of a run through some teased keywords for every single faction in Warhammer 40k. A bunch of these have some really quite interesting stuff, I think. Looks like a fair few units will be changing in their battlefield roles quite a bit, Maybe not too unsurprising given that all their datasheets are being rewritten. I feel like for some armies that have gained Infiltrators or Scouts, that could be quite a big deal. There's definitely a few intimidating things with those keywords, like World Eaters 8-bound getting Scouts innately. Let me know your thoughts though. Are there any surprises that you weren't expecting to see here? And what do you make of the units that might have been dropped from Battle Line? If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics. I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming, and I'm sure we'll have loads more to talk about with the 10th edition rollout. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description if you'd like to help support there. The channel's Patreon is what allows me to make all these videos quite so regularly and dedicate my full time towards the channel. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.